Premier Qiang to Lusaka, marking the first visit by a Chinese premier in 28 years. The trip comes as the copper-rich nation emerges from a prolonged financial crisis and works to stabilise its economy under a new, more sustainable debt repayment plan. China remains Zambia's largest official creditor with $5.7 billion owed, and Beijing is keen to showcase Zambia as a model participant in President Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese officials have framed the visit as an example of how African nations can recover from financial distress with China's support. As Zambia pushes to industrialise, it is seeking fresh investment in mining, infrastructure and production capacity. China, for its part, is looking to expand exports of tractors, electrical equipment and construction vehicles into the Zambian market. Despite recent economic turbulence, the outlook is brightening. The World Bank projects that Zambia's economy will grow 6.5% next year, outpacing its average growth of about 5% over the past 2 decades. Andrew KP Leung joins us once again. What is Beijing trying to signal to Africa and the West with this trip?
China's engagement with Africa dates back a long time ago. I remember even 20 odd years ago when I was invited as a speaker in Africa, in Ghana, hosted by a rating agency. China was already all over the place in Africa. But China's approach to Africa is very, very different from the West. The West, at the beginning, concentrated on aid, AID, in other words, debt relief, giving money to bring up to relieve poverty. But China concentrated on capacity building, capacity in terms of infrastructure. For example, Africa is the world's remaining large source of agricultural products. But a lot of the paddy fields are out of nowhere. And how do farmers bring the products to the market? I mean, there are not even roads or bridges or ports at that time. So China concentrated on capacity building. In other words, the belief is that rather than giving the poor people fish, you teach them how to fish. Now, the another big difference is that China's engagement in Africa, all the Chinese either officials or NGOs or companies, they operate in the field and they live together with the locals in very poor conditions. The Chinese, as some of the industrialists, some of the investors, they live in camps in the field. Whereas, for example, even the United Nations officials on aid, they live in hotels and drive in cars. Again, to the African people, there was a difference. However, China's now facing some headwinds in Africa, in the sense that sometimes the Chinese companies bring along their workers, and the locals seeing that, well, the Chinese companies may be stealing their jobs. And also there is, in the beginning, less sensitivity to some of the local customs or even the local ecology. But now the latest Chinese engagement has learned all these lessons. It's focusing, for example, under the Belt and Road Initiative, is focusing on smaller projects,
Yes.
on greater transparency, and on engaging with local stakeholders.
Yeah, and Andrew, just quickly, the West are trying to regain ground in Africa. Are they too late?
Well, they are already, I would say, there was a relative lack of attention to Africa, particularly under the early Trump, well, the first Trump administration, and also even tracing it back to Biden or even to Obama. Relatively speaking, Africa was seen to be backward. It's only a place where there are lots of poor people to be fed, lots of problems. And President Trump at one time, referred to some of these countries as expletive deleted
Yes.
countries. But now they're wising up to the fact that some of the economies are very fast moving, For example, Africa promises to be the fastest growing population. By the end of this century, in 2100, one out of four world population, as the population growth has shrunk in Europe, in Asia, almost 40% of the world population will be African. So I think that there is a lot of dynamism, and the United States government is wising up to it.
Andrew KP Leung, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Pleasure to have you on the programme. Now we move on to our final story of the hour, and Indonesia's Semeru volcano